All right, good morning, everyone. My name is Kim Babine. I am Director of Community Partnerships with DEED VRS, Vocational Rehabilitation Services, and we have a performance-based agreement training for you, PBA. And we are so happy to have our community partners with us today, both organizations that work with VRS and State Services for the Blind, SSB. And some of you are thinking about becoming partners with Vocational Rehabilitation Services. So welcome, we're excited to have you as you learn a little bit more about some of our services. We will get going in just a few minutes. We're really happy. We'll get going with the bulk of the presentation, but I want to turn it over to Sarah for a little fun start to our morning. And then Chris and I will offer welcoming remarks after that fun start.
Thank you, Kim. Well, we just thought we would maybe start with something fun, just to get this going. I know it's early in the morning, so curious what your idea of a vacation looks like. So this poll is going to be open for just a few seconds. If you want to click on your thoughts, and we'll come back together. All right, I'll give you 10 more seconds to respond. All right. So it looks like a majority of individuals have ideal vacations being some sort of tropical or beach vacation at 46%. Followed by outdoors hiking, fishing, and nature, followed by some road trips at 15%. Only a few of you don't like vacations and like working all the time, so I guess we appreciate your dedication to both rehab services or to your organization. But I think vacations are great. I'm leaving for vacation on Friday, which I cannot wait for. I would have answered this poll probably. My favorite vacation is tropical beach, but I'm actually going on an outdoors hiking nature vacation. So thank you for participating.
Wonderful. Thanks, Sarah. So just to get us going, I want to thank everyone for being here. We have been working very hard over the last 6 months to make some changes to our general performance-based agreement for job placement and follow-up services, and come up with a brand new performance-based agreement for people who are on waivers. So as E1MN, E1 Minnesota launches on July 1st, this is VRS's response to that and our ability to pay a little bit more for those performance-based agreements, those job placement and retention services for people on a waiver. So I want to thank all of you. Everyone's been along for this journey as we have shared information in the last couple months as we've been developing this. We appreciate your feedback and your questions and the things that have really made us think and sometimes go back to the drawing board and come up with other ideas. So we're really grateful to you. We're also really grateful to Sarah Sundin and Evie Wold, who have been leading up the charge for vocational rehabilitation services and leading some groups, some work groups that have been working through these issues. So here we are, it is June 29th, and all these changes take effect on July 1. So this is not the end, it is the beginning of the information that you'll receive about these changes. We wanted to make sure that you had it before July 1, and we will be following up with more information and more detail as we hear what questions you have or what things might not be super clear. We also know that no matter how much time we would have spent on this, there are always things that slip through that maybe we don't anticipate. We are anticipating those things. So we are, we'll be looking very closely at feedback that we receive from you over, the coming weeks and months. We'll be making, decisions about whether we make small changes here and there, We will also do a more formal review where we look at data, we work on some specific targeted feedback, make sure that we're hearing from all of you, staff and community partners and individuals and their families to see how this is working. So know that that's coming, that's built into the process, and we'll be in touch as those things, it's time to work on those things and turn those on. So I'm very grateful to have you all here today. I am going to turn it over to Chris McVeigh, who will also just provide a few opening comments.
Good morning, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us. This is a performance-based agreement training that DEED VRS is hosting for our community partners and our potential community partners in Minnesota. I want to also, I know Kim and I want to thank the folks from Vocational Rehabilitation Services and State Services for the Blind that are also joining the meeting today. VRS and SSP staff were trained actually last week, but we invited them back to this session so that they could hear this information in additional time, but also to get a sense of what our community partners are thinking about and asking about. I think it's a richer experience when we can have a way for us to all engage together. So thank you to VRS and SSB staff that are joining us today. And with that, I'm going to hand it to Sarah and Evie.
All right, well, thank you everyone, and we'll get going. I'm going to share my screen. And Evie, just a quick thumbs up that is working for you would be great. Okay, awesome. Well, we're glad you're all here. My name is Sarah Sundin, and I am a program specialist on the Community Partnerships team. I've been with Voc Rehab Services for just over 5 years, and prior to that, I was a community partner. And so I feel like this training is just like bringing everything I've known in my career together, and I'm just really excited today to launch this with you. So a little bit of housekeeping. What I put in the chat for you is our question form. So we have the chat feature turned off today. So please click to that link for the Microsoft question form for your questions throughout the training. You can submit a question over and over and over again. But we will definitely look at those and do our best to answer as many today or get back to you at the end following this training through some FAQs that we're developing.
And
so as I mentioned.
Oh, good morning. I just want to say hello. I'm Evie Wold. I'm a program specialist in placement. I live and work majority of my, I live all the time and work the majority of time in Southern Minnesota, but also help out on statewide projects. So happy to be here this morning. Thank you.
I'm so sorry. As I mentioned today, and as Chris and Kim have said, the lens for our training is going to be on performance-based agreements, which we call PBAs. And we're going to talk about the changes to the general PBA and launch and share with you the new E1pva. So just to be really clear, the training today is about PBAs. It's not going to be an in-depth training about how we provide placement services, about supported employment, or about the E1MN or MOU process as a whole. And again, I put this in the chat, but questions can go through our Microsoft form. So our objectives for this morning is to review the VRS job placement and follow-up services. So we're all on the same page to understand how the PBA milestone payments fit into the job placement and follow-up process, to know the difference between the general PBA and the E1pva and when Voc Rehab Services will refer for each one, and to differentiate between follow-up and job coaching services. So as we focus our lens today, we're going to assume that the job seeker needs job placement assistance, informed choice has been discussed, and that they have chosen a placement professional. VRS has been updating many of our forms in anticipation for some of these changes. And we'll talk about these as we go through our training. Our updated forms can be found on our external website link. And so we can paste that into the chat later for you to have access to if you can't find it.
All right. Before we get into the details of the placement and follow-up services, we really want to dive into the definitions for placement and follow-up and how you know when someone needs them. So let's look at the definitions and then we'll work yourselves into the process. Placement services. This is a list of activities that we often encounter in the job search phase of the process. So identifying and developing the job opportunities as placement professionals, we're researching the labor market, often contacting employers, looking for classes and looking at job boards. We assist with the creating and updating of resumes. This is often an ongoing process depending on the job that our job seekers looking for. We're completing employment applications online, which are challenging and sometimes even still paper applications. Preparing for job interviews, doing sample questions, mock interviews, completing cover letters and thank you letters, providing on-site job analysis, working with employers, looking at modifications, structural or attitudinal barriers that affect our job seekers' work location. And so these are just a sample of some of the placement services that we provide, and it's not limited just to this list, but this is a broad overview. So let's look at follow-up services and a broad definition of what that looks like. So follow-up services occur after someone finds and starts a position, and are those services provided to assist that person with the adjustment into employment. We know this is an important time in the process, and sometimes follow-up services can require as much or more time and effort than placement services to ensure a successful outcome. Common follow-up services include that orientation paperwork, sometimes getting feedback from an employer on work performance if the job seeker has disclosed. And as the individual gets acclimated, follow-up services continue. The placement professionals continue to identify and coordinate services needed and assist the individual in advancing in their employment. Follow-up services we know are very individualized. And notice that job coaching is not on our follow-up list anymore, and we'll go into that today. This is a nice overview of the job search process. So it starts with that pre-job search activity on the left side and goes through some of the pieces that the counselor might go through with the job seeker before the placement person joins that team at the time of the signed placement plan. So a lot of, there's some nuances and some tweaking that we did to this process, and we'll be going more in depth into that today. And this form is available on the deed site as well. And it's just a nice overview of that, the whole process in the visual. So the first step before the placement plan is done, before the placement professional joins the team, the counselor does a lot of activities with that job seeker. They look at different areas relating to finding and keeping employment before that process even begins. So we're not going to go into depth on these. We just want you to be aware of the many activities and topics that the counselors go through with the job seekers to ensure that they're ready for that job search. Once the person is ready, we need to choose a placement professional. So let's talk about who can provide placement services within an E1pva. So informed choice is the process that engages the participant in the process of choosing which community partner they feel best meets their service needs. All VR participants go through the same informed choice process whether they have a Medicaid waiver or not. The VR participants may choose a provider with a PT contract or a VRS placement coordinator to help them with their job search. And community partners do not have to be 245D licensed to provide E1pvas. That being said, in many cases, a VR participant has been connected with a community partner who worked with them during waiver services. And that participant might choose to continue with the same community partner to assist them with the find phase, and then continue working with them when they move back to DHS funding in the keep phase. So in this case, there's a benefit to being a 245D licensed provider and a VRS provider, so a participant can have a seamless continuum of services. However, the community partners who do not have a 245D license can provide E1pva services and may be selected by that participant if they feel that they best meet their needs.
Okay, so we're going to start with the general PBA, and we are going to go through the PBA process from start to finish so you can clearly see where some of the new changes or clarified guidance takes place. Remember, these changes start on July 1st. So here's the milestone structure for the general PBA. There are no changes to the payment structure for the general PBA. We still have 3 milestones, which is milestone 1, the signed placement plan at $1,330. Milestone 2 is the first paid day of employment at $1,200. And milestone 3 is successful placement closure at $1,270. So the PBA pays out $3,800 if all 3 milestones are hit. And the occupational communication specialist services differential of $400 may be added if it is on our partner's contract. So now it's time to prepare for the placement professional to join the team. We have some new changes here that we want to highlight. Our referral process for job placement and follow-up services starts with the invitation to placement. And there are 3 required documents that VRS prepares for you, the placement professional. The first item is the invitation to placement. This form has been updated. It is used to invite the placement professional to join the team. For VRS, there is a section on the front highlighting required components and required if completed. So remember, we're not sending all the copies of the I-9 information, but we're checking complete if VR staff have verified that the job seeker has the appropriate employment documents. The second is the VRS counselor will also send a completed sample application. This is a generic job application that is prepared to assist with placement services and the development of a resume. In completing the sample application, VRS staff get to know more about the job seeker by learning their strengths, abilities, work history, challenges, and support needs. By completing this prior to the placement professional getting involved, it can help speed up the placement process. The job seeker should complete as much as possible independently with a family or support person if needed. Finally, the relevant information from the VR assessment of needs. The VR assessment of needs is completed by a counselor and is a narrative representation of the job seeker's unique strengths, resources, priorities, concerns, abilities, capabilities, and interests. There's a change here in sending relevant information versus automatically sending the whole document. We don't want you, our community partners, to worry about this change. The change is about data privacy practices and making sure that we at VRS have control over the information the person has agreed to release. So by giving the whole assessment, we aren't vetting the information to make sure we aren't releasing private information about that job seeker. We understand the value of the information in the VR assessment and needs, and we'll send you the information that we're able to send and that is relevant to the job search process. It is our goal to get these 3 documents to the placement professional in advance so that the placement professional has time to review it and complete any necessary paperwork ahead of time. We really want to make it a positive experience for the job seeker, and we want to avoid having that placement plan meeting be a meeting where they're just signing paperwork. So again, at that first meeting, It's a meeting with all the core team members, the job seeker, the placement professional, and the VR counselor. This meeting is to establish rapport with the job seeker for meaningful discussion and sharing of ideas regarding their job search. It's about the job seeker and what all of us on the team need to do to help them achieve success. We want to focus on creating that positive experience. So we want to focus on looking at that team approach and taking time to really think about the placement plan and then filling out other necessary paperwork later. When you complete the VRS placement plan, you can use your own form or our new updated version. The VRS placement plan is a template for identifying the responsibilities of each core team member, including the job seeker, the placement professional, and the counselor. These responsibilities should be identified and agreed upon by the team during the placement plan meeting. We know that many community partners have their own placement plan form, and you can continue to use that. If you use your placement plan form, the VRS counselor as facilitator of the team should ensure that all the roles and responsibilities are properly identified. Remember, only select the applicable roles and responsibilities on the form. Not all items need to be checked for every job seeker. We want to make sure this process is very individualized. The placement professional is responsible for ensuring that the plan is agreed upon. And it's very important that during this placement plan meeting, the first 60-day meeting is scheduled. We'll talk more about 60-day meetings to come. So some changes to the signed placement plan. For payment for Milestone 1, the community partner must provide VRS with a signed copy of the placement plan with an invoice. A change is that the community partner will no longer need to submit a placement plan meeting summary. The VR counselor will case note the summary of the meeting. Everyone gets copies of that signed plan. Let's talk a little bit about some communication expectations. It's going to be very important that we always communicate early and communicate often. We are making a change from our bi-weekly communication updates that you've known for a long time and moving towards a monthly progress report. Monthly progress reports, we'll talk about these a little bit more detail, but this report must be received during the job placement follow-up services phase. Our partners will submit their last bi-weekly communication update, highlighting information through June 30th of 2021. So any work done through June will be done via the bi-weekly communication update and the process that you currently use. You should submit this to VR in early July. Starting July 1st, the monthly progress reports will become our form and be used. And the first report is going to be due to VR on August 10th, summarizing the month of July. The placement professional communication expectation is that they attempt at least weekly communication with the job seeker while working with them. Okay, let's talk about the monthly progress report. So here are some changes in the written communication from the placement professional. One, the monthly progress report is now required. Everyone submits once a month the monthly progress report until that case is closed. This report is also going to be used for Milestone 2, first paid day of employment details, and for Milestone 3, successful placement closure details. This report meets RSA's requirements with employment details. And we have also vetted this report with a number of our community partners and gotten your input and important information on the report as well. A change for us is that everyone is going to be using the same report. The report, we are requiring our format. So the information that is shared is uniform and consistent across all job seekers and all organizations. And then these monthly progress reports will be submitted within 10 days following the end of each month. And finally, just remember, this is not intended to stop communication. We want to stay in touch. This is simply a report summary of each month. So let's talk a little bit about those 60-day check-in meetings. All core team members come together at a live meeting every 60 days until that job seeker has obtained employment and worked their first shift. We define a live meeting as an in-person or virtual meeting that is scheduled and planned, not just a check-in on the phone. However, we know that with COVID restrictions, in-person meetings are not yet an option for VRS, and we want to be person-centered and meeting that job seeker where they're at. So if virtual meetings don't work for the job seeker, a scheduled phone meeting is okay as long as all core team members are present. It is important that during the 60-day check-in that we review the job search process, identify and address any barriers to employment, amend the employment or placement plan as needed, implement new strategies, agree at that meeting that placement and follow-up services will continue. If the agreement is that placement and follow-up services will continue, then the next 60-day meeting should be scheduled at that meeting.
And now we're at the point of job offer, the exciting day where we get to celebrate. Here's our office. Everyone's happy. The job offer came. So we have a lot to think about at this point, right when that job offer is made. The placement professional, of course, will want to let the counselor know, the VRS counselor know right away when that job offer is received. They'll be going through any needed supports like job coaching, accommodations, technology, uniforms. They'll be addressing any new discoveries about the job seeker's background and maybe some barriers to successful employment. So if there's previously scheduled childcare, transportation, and that job location may impact that, they'd be talking through those considerations. Also, placement professionals really often, and this is a best practice, would be meeting with that job seeker before the first day of work to go through all these pieces. This can be really helpful, of course, if our job seeker is anxious about that first day, just kind of laying the groundwork for that first day of work. The placement professional may be communicating with the employer if they have a release to do so. They'll be ensuring the individual understands their responsibilities to report their earnings to Social Security or any other benefit programs. And then the counselor here will be looking for any needed supports as well. And then if there's more intensive supports will be needed, job coaching should be discussed at this time, and an authorization should be prepared. So this shouldn't be the first conversation about job coaching. This is the time to confirm those needs and get an authorization in place. So the potential need for job coaching usually starts at the placement plan and those 60-day meetings. We encourage everyone to use context clues from your work together. And I, just from being a placement person, I think you get a pretty good feeling about the support needs as you work with someone through their job search. And we'll talk more about job search or job coaching in a little bit. The next piece we want to talk about is the 2 90-day clocks. So this graphic kind of shows things may have been a little fuzzy, and we really want to make this clear. VRS operates under 2 90-day clocks to consider for the rehabilitation process. This isn't new. We're just really wanting to clarify it and call it out. You may have understood it before, but we want to say it again today. We have 2 90-day clocks. The first clock is called employed for 90 days, and the second clock is achieved 90 days of employment stability. So let's just look at those side by side. So the employed for 90 days clock, this starts day 1 of work. And once the first day of work, paid work is done, that is the first day of employed for 90 days. This clock, it tracks the 90 days to reach that third milestone, and closure from placement and follow-up services. And the person working must meet that job must meet the definition of an acceptable position. And we'll go through that in a little bit, but considerations such as minimum wage, a competitive integrated employment, and we'll go through those considerations, but that job must meet that standard. Now let's look at achieve 90 days of employment stability. And this is really a VRS clock. This tracks the VR closure. And so this starts once employment stability is reached. We move the person to in employment, and this starts the achieved 90 days of employment stability. This can be day one of the first day of work, or it could start later. And this clock may match the employed for 90 days clock, or it could be different. So employment stability is referenced in our VRS policy and guidance. Our counselors determine when employment stability is reached. And we know it might feel a little different for our counselors to close a PBA when the participant may still need supports. But we're looking at this being a different way of thinking about services. So let's just walk through an example of what this could look like. So here's what employed for 90 days looks like. So our partners are very familiar with this. So Sam starts a new job on February 1st. There's a job coach on site providing training supports for the first 2 weeks. So this is day one of employed for 90 days. On February 15th, Sam, the job coach, and the counselor agree that he no longer needs job coaching. So follow-up services continue, and that would be day 15 of the employed for 90 days. Then on May 1st, Sam's still working, doing well in his job. This is the 90 days of employed for 90 days. And VRS will pay milestone 3 when we have all of our reports and invoices, and the placement and follow-up services will be closed. Now let's look at what achieved 90 days of employment stability looks like. So this is the clock VRS is watching as well. So Sam starts a new job on the 1st. There's a job coach. And so February 1st is day one of employed for 90 days. On the 15th, the job coach agrees he no longer needs, and Sam agrees he no longer needs the job coaching. So this is day 15 of employed for 90 days, but it's day one of achieved 90 days of employment stability. So the counselor moves Sam from job coaching to in employment in our Workforce One status. That's our case management system. And the job and the placement professional continues to provide follow-up services. So Sam maintains his job, continues to work, and has reached that 90 days employed. So the placement professional bills for milestone 3, placement and follow-up services closed, but VR continues to keep Sam open until he reaches that 90 days of employment stability. So everyone is in agreement that no other services are needed, and often VR will move to close his VRS file and outcome. So VRS may continue to keep a person open longer than our placement providers. Job coaching does not impact the employed for 90 days clock. Employment stability might have many meanings, and VRS should reference our training and guidance. It'll be important for you, the community partner, to track that employed for 90 days. And VRS is going to be watching that 90 days of employment stability, while our partners should be looking at the employed for 90-day clock.
Okay, so let's move back to our PBA. And prior to the 2 90-day clocks that we talked about, we know that a job offer was made. So the job seeker has officially started. The placement professional provides the VRS counselor with job information as soon as possible, and the monthly progress report with the details on employment come no later than 7 days after that employment start date. We must collect and record the employer name, address, wage, and job title, hours, start date, level of benefit, and the name of the person who gave you that information. Again, this is day 1 of employed for 90 days. And for Milestone Two Payment, the community partner submits that monthly progress report with the job hire details and invoices for the Milestone Two. It is important to make sure that all monthly progress reports have been received since the last milestone was paid. Depending on the support needs, this may or may not start that Achieve for 90 days of employment stability clock. And remember that while the placement professional has 7 days to get the job offer details to us on the monthly progress report, we must know about the job offer prior to the start date, so any supports like uniforms or job coaching can be set up. And we'll talk about job coaching soon. All right, I know you've been waiting for this. New changes to job coaching. So starting July 1st, the 20 hours of job coaching are no longer part of the PBA and will now become a separate service. VRS staff have been asked to review their caseloads and identify individuals who are currently working in PBAs. And if you think a participant will need job coaching, discuss this with the counselor and request an authorization to start on July 1st. With the job changes in job coaching, it will be important to remember job coaching should be discussed at the time of job offer, where there's agreement on hours to be authorized and a job start date for the authorization to begin. VR will move the job seeker to our new activity status called job coaching. And job coaching is now a layered service that can be authorized in addition to a PBA. So here are a couple scenarios. Example number 1, there's a participant in a PBA and they are currently working today, June 29th, and receiving job coaching that is baked into the PBA. If you think that participant will need to continue job coaching on or after July 1st, then VRS staff should work with the participant to amend that employment plan to include job coaching, and both rehab staff should create a new authorization for hourly job coaching starting July 1st. So we're only a few days away, and hopefully you've all had those conversations with counselors already. Let's talk about the changes after July 1st. It will be important to define follow-up and job coaching. So follow-up is part of all PBAs. After job placement, the placement professional provides follow-up services to the individual from the first day of employment until placement and follow-up services close. The placement professional identifies any areas of concern or additional services needed to maintain or advance in employment. And follow-up services include communicating with the employer if appropriate to ensure that essential performance standards are being met, and offer assistance and resources to facilitate adjustment to a position. Follow-up requires regular check-ins with the individual to assist the person's adjustment to competitive integrated employment, at a minimum bi-weekly check-ins during follow-up. Follow-up could involve contact with the individual and/or employer on or off-site using the agreed upon mode of communication, whether that is email, text, telephone, or face-to-face, to determine ongoing satisfaction with their terms of employment. This could include communicating with the employer to ensure that those essential performance standards are being met, if the job seeker has disclosed and there's a relationship with that business. And then remember that monthly progress reports are required to document the 2 follow-up contacts. Additional communication with the VRS counselor may be required if you see additional services that are needed, like job coaching, assistive technology, etc. So, job coaching is a time-limited service. It is authorized separately and prior to the start of service. It involves providing support, training, and consultation to the individual and/or the employer to facilitate successful competitive integrated employment. It's provided to individuals needing more intensive services than the placement follow-up service and provided up to the point of employment stability. It can be performed on or off site. When providing job coaching services, the job coach provides regular updates to VR. We strongly recommend weekly updates as a best practice. This can be a phone call or email, but we want to stay informed because we all know how quickly things on a job can change, and VR should be kept up to date and not reported to at the end of the month. We want to make sure that we're working as a team to best support the individual for success in employment. A job coaching report is submitted at the time of billing an invoice. You can use our template with the necessary information, or you can use your own. Travel time can be authorized as agreed upon. Both VRS and the partners have the responsibility in having this conversation and making sure that this option is addressed. We want you to remember that job coaching is now a layered service. When you layer a service like job coaching and a PBA, then our community partner now needs to complete the paperwork that's required for both services. So in this situation, while in a PBA and in follow-up, we will require that our community partner continues to fill out the monthly progress reports highlighting the follow-up services. If our community partner is also providing job coaching, then it will also require those weekly updates on progress and a job coaching report with the invoice. VRS staff can authorize up to 60 hours of job coaching, and after 60 hours, it does require RAM approval. So we know that there might be some differing opinions when deciding between follow-up and job coaching, and it is important to have a conversation and discussion with the placement team to ensure that the job seeker gets the supports and services that they need prior to services starting. So here is a side-by-side of follow-up versus job coaching. Again, follow-up is provided to all new employees. It's assistance with the new employee orientation, initial paperwork, assistance in getting that adjustment to employment, possibly getting feedback from an employer on work performance if they've disclosed, identifying services needed to maintain or advance in employment, and any orientation paperwork assistance that might be needed in addition. Job coaching is considered an intensive training and support service. So it can include facilitating communication with that employer, educating the employer about the individual's needs and accommodations, and it may include assistance with the creation of or use of visuals, checklists, timers, hand-over-hand instruction, or apps. It is important for our partners to stay in communication with VRS. If job coaching is needed, once a job is secured, this is the time to request that authorization. We try to prepare as best as possible. However, we know that sometimes last-minute job supports come up. We acknowledge that there is some gray between follow-up and job coaching. And we know that not every person will need job coaching. And we want to make sure we assess the service on an individual need basis, looking at the person, what the placement team has learned about support needs throughout the job search process, and the specific position that the individual accepts. Partnership and consultation will be the key to success. So we say, when in doubt, consult. So let me give you a little example about follow-up versus job coaching. As a former placement specialist, and I know that Evie said this too, sometimes you just have that feeling when you know job coaching is needed and more intensive support is needed. So here's how I see the difference in follow-up versus job coaching. So my son started his very first summer job. And so I wanted to help him with the W-2 paperwork. I helped him with direct deposit forms. I made sure that he read and signed all those consents and acknowledgements and orientation paperwork that he gets that a typical 16-year-old probably has no idea about. And this would be follow-up services. It's something we would make sure and check that every new worker has in place. He and I also talked about his uniform and what he needs to wear. This conversation is also follow-up. We talked about his work schedule. Does he know how to access it? Does he know who to talk to or call if he gets sick? Can he trade shifts? How does that work? This conversation is also follow-up services. We talked about his scheduling and him marking his availability for work on a monthly basis. So every month I have been checking in with him to make sure that he's completed his work availability schedule and turned it in. This is follow-up. When he comes home from work, I ask him how his day was. Sometimes we take time to chat about something frustrating or exciting, and I listen to and assist with the processing of situations. This is follow-up. If he needed extensive help understanding that new employee orientation information and had issues with comprehension and wanting to understand what that paperwork meant and walking through piece by piece, then that could be job coaching for him. If he was working and even with the employer support had challenges with remembering the order of how to do his daily tasks, if he needed help creating a checklist for his duties, if he needed to have a visual or set some timers and cues to make sure that everything was getting done appropriately, that would be job coaching. If he needed assistance talking to his employer for extra training or support, or if he needed assistance in getting an accommodation set in place, then that would be job coaching. So hopefully that helps kind of set the stage and provide a little bit of clarity between follow-up and job coaching. So what we're going to do next is we're going to break out into some small groups to talk more about follow-up versus job coaching. We have set up our breakout rooms based on BENS locations. Hopefully you are familiar with the BENS, the business engagement networks that happen across the state. We are asking that you choose one BEN location that works for you. We know that sometimes some of you attend more than one, but just choose one breakout room. We're going to give you 20 minutes to discuss a few questions in your breakout. And if you have trouble getting into a Zoom room, we're going to ask that you raise your hand and come off mute, and we will assist you. So I'm going to encourage you right now to take a picture of this slide so that you can talk about it in your breakout group. When we go into breakouts, you won't be able to see the slides, you'll just see each other. So please take a picture of this so that you have the questions to discuss. As we said, there can be gray between follow-up and job coaching. And we can anticipate that not every job seeker will require job coaching. And this will be something to discuss throughout the process and then to consult with the VR counselor at the time of offer. The ultimate decider about job coaching is the VR counselor. So we will give you 20 minutes to talk about, is the distinction between follow-up versus job coaching clear? And what clues do you look for in the job search process that might indicate that job coaching should be authorized in addition to the follow-up services? We have in our Microsoft form a question number 4, where you can submit either your tips from your conversation in the breakout, any comments you have, or questions you have from this breakout group. So take a few minutes to grab that Microsoft form from the chat, since you won't have access to that in the breakouts either. So I think I'm going to turn it over to Janine to have us open up those breakout rooms. Again, if you have any trouble getting into a breakout room, raise your hand and we can assist you.
The breakout, so just wanted to welcome folks as they come back in. And I'll turn it over to Sarah and Evie as people come back in.
Well, welcome everyone. We hope that you had some really good discussions in your breakouts. What we're gonna encourage you to do, Evie has that form in the chat. So, please make sure that you take time to enter any feedback, tips, aha moments, questions that you have about job coaching and follow-up into that Microsoft form. That's question number 4, specifically about job coaching. We're going to talk about job coaching versus follow-up again when we get to the E1pva. So hopefully that continues to help you build clarity between the 2 different services and what that means. And then we will come back to those questions as a whole when we do our Q&A at the end of our presentation. So I think what we're going to do, I know we just all came back, but we want to give you some time also to make sure you ask your questions or put that information in there. So we're going to take a 5-minute break. And what we'll do is we'll come back at 10:20. All right. Thank you. All right, welcome back, everyone. Go back to, hopefully you all had time to enter any questions you had based on that small group discussion. And we are going to keep moving in our presentation. So I'm going to share my screen again. All right. And then hopefully, again, put your questions into that Microsoft form, and we will do what we can to address your questions. We will be talking about job coaching and follow-up again as we get into the E1 process in a little bit. And then, of course, in the questions and answers at the end of the session. So as we wait for people to return, we're going to do a really quick another poll. So we'll see how well you know Snow White and the 7 Dwarfs. So Snow White and the 7 Dwarfs, which one of these is the right answer for the 7 Dwarfs? I'll leave this open for about 15 more seconds here. Okay. Oh, look at that. A whole bunch of people know their Disney characters. Well done, everyone.
Sarah, you're making me feel my age today.
Sorry, Kim.
Not many
But
people
be
fell
proud
for
if you got it right.
and not many people fell for the Smurfette thrown in there, I guess. That was it.
We just thought we'd have a little fun. Well, I mean, Evie and I think you know, PBAs are tons of fun, but we thought we'd have a little fun with you guys too. Okay. So as we were talking before, at this point in the placement process, the VR counselor and the placement professional should be checking in with that individual on a regular basis. For the VR counselor, this check-in should be documented in Workforce One, and this is an important step in the process and helps maintains the connection with that individual. It also helps to ensure that the individual has the supports they need in place to be successful in their employment. In addition, in those follow-up check-ins, it's important to check in and note and make any changes that may occur with their supervisor, any natural supports, things going on with their work culture, their job satisfaction, transportation and hours, housing, childcare, and making sure that their wages are reported to Social Security if they have Social Security. Also, it's important to remember that the monthly progress reports continue until closure from placement and follow-up services, that we expect the placement professional is doing follow-up with that individual twice a month, that the supports match that individual's unique rehabilitation needs, and if there is job coaching, that the partner should provide an update to VRS weekly with those invoice reports. So I did see a question in there and just want to emphasize, when we have two services, then you would follow two paperwork processes. So you would do the monthly progress report, which meets the requirements of follow-up services. And if you're also doing job coaching, then you would have those updates, those quick updates to VRS and the job coaching report. And then when employment stability is reached, that after that job coaching has phased out to a point where employment stability has been reached, then that starts that achieve for 90 days of employment stability clock for VR.
All right, so we finally made it through to closure. So some of the conditions for closure from placement and follow-up services, there's a form on our deed website and also in our VRS guidance that and on our SharePoint that goes over these conditions for successful closure from placement and follow-up services, but let's go through them quickly. We want to make sure that the job matches the job goal that was on the employment plan, that the person's paid at least minimum wage and customary rate and benefit level. The number of hours per week is agreed on and adequate, that the work is performed in a competitive integrated setting. Ongoing supports are matching the needs of that now employee. And the 90 days of employment must be with the same employer in the position unless the individual made an informed decision for successive temporary assignments. Also, the VRS record of service, as we talked about, may not be closed before the community partner can receive the final PBA milestone payment, as VRS may still be providing other services. So for that third PBA milestone, we want to make sure the job seeker has been working for 90 days since Milestone 2 and the first day of employment. Got a little one here saying goodbye. The PBA Milestone 3 payment, we need to make sure that the final monthly progress report has been submitted with the details on accepted job offer, and that the verification, that employment verification at closure, that section was completed. We will be looking for the invoice for the final milestone and those, making sure that all those monthly progress reports have been received since that second milestone. So now we've made it through the general PBA process, and we're going to pivot a little bit to talk about clarity with some PBA special circumstances. So there are some special circumstances we know that can occur during a PBA, like 12 months in a PBA or a PBA that goes on to hold status. And those are two situations that we want to go over and provide some guidance around now. So when someone hits, this is the new sticker bouncing in. When someone hits that 12-month mark of a PBA, there's some considerations that we want to look at for the continuation of services. So this is new guidance. And placement and follow-up services begin the day of the signed placement plan. We know the team will be meeting every 60 days to discuss the job search progress for up to 12 months. If a job search continues at or beyond the 12-month mark, we want to go through 3 different options with you. So the first one, the progress in the job search is continuing, and the team agrees that the person's making progress. At this point of 12 months, we want to cancel the existing PBA, and a new PBA should be encumbered. The new authorized PBA will include all the milestones, starting with the first milestone of the signed placement plan. As always, those services are determined by the counselor and the participant. The second option would be if the placement progress has stalled out or stopped, the person and the team agree that job search should be discontinued, and we look at other services outside of job search, like job shadows, business tours, looking at careers should be considered. The existing PBA should be canceled at this point as well, and the counselor, the person and the team will determine what other services are required and who would be responsible for providing those services. The third scenario, a person has received the VRS job search services, and VRS determines the person can no longer benefit from continued placement at this time. So the team agrees that the placement services have been exhausted. So the remaining PBA should be canceled. The person would be referred to another agency, such as the county, for required services, if appropriate, and the VRS case would be closed at that time. And it's important to remember that in all cases, the VRS counselor makes that final decision on the authorizations after consulting with the placement professional and the job seeker. All right, so let's move on to holds. This is another area where we have some new guidance around holds. We heard from our partners, from you, that holds, they take up a spot. It's hard for caseload management. We encumber money into a PBA while a person's on hold, and all of us are really providing supports to that person on hold. So it isn't like our services just stop when that person goes on hold. And this would be situations where there may be a medical issue or mental health. There just needs to be a pause on that job search. And it can be the provider or the job seeker. We heard an example in rural Minnesota where the placement provider went on to maternity leave, for example. So we came up with some guidance. Of course, communication is super important during this process. When a PBA is paused for more than 2 weeks, a hold will be discussed with the placement team. When placement services are on hold, of course, communication is important. Minimally at 30 days, VRS will check in with the job seeker. Hopefully we're checking in very regularly during this hold. This is new. At 60 days, a meeting will be held with the placement team, and a decision will be made about next steps. The PBA clock is put on hold, and we decide at this point 2 different options. Either we are scheduling a date to resume placement services, or we are closing job placement services. The placement team, of course, as we said, should stay in communication. The closure is at the discretion of the counselor and the job seeker, and often our counselors at this point will be checking in with their managers on these decisions. That 60-day meeting will be a key point where we decide what the future of this PBA will be. Is there a meeting or are we closing? If at 60 days the person says they're ready to begin, but it might be a week or 2, we set the meeting and keep going. But if there's still ambiguity about what is happening or the person's just not ready at that time, we'd be looking at closure from that PBA. Okay, I know we haven't been back a long time, but we're just going to take 5 minutes here for a stretch break. And then we're going to launch into our E1 PBA process. And we'll be likely not taking a break after that. So we want to make sure that you had a quick stretch time here, and we'll be back in 5 minutes to complete the training.
All right. I'm going to share my screen again. All right. So as we wait for some more people to come back, we'll do a couple other polls. We'll see if, I feel like our first or the last one was really easy. So I'm curious about how many of you know what the official Minnesota state tree is? Give it about 5 more seconds for an answer. And the polling. Oh, you guys are really smart. You are right. The official state tree is the red pine. Good job. All right, one more. Let's see. Oops. Oops, I just relaunched that. Oh. Ah! All right, my polling ability. Okay, here we go. What is the Minnesota state fruit? Does no one like seedless watermelon? All right, 5 more seconds. All right, nice work, everyone. You're right. The state fruit is the Honeycrisp apple. And our very last one. Did you know that we have a state muffin?
I think we have a smart Minnesota group here.
A little smarter than our training group, Abby. 5 seconds. Ding, ding, ding. You guys are brilliant. The blueberry muffin is the official state muffin. I actually told Evie that when we were creating this training, and she had no idea we had a state muffin. Fun facts. Okay, we're going to launch into the E1pva. And just as a refresher for you, E1mn, or Employment First Minnesota, is a model that is coming with engage, plan, find, and keep. And you can see on this model where the funding changes between VRS and DHS. And our performance-based agreements, our PBAs, are going to focus on the find section here. With Employment First Minnesota, the waiver case manager will now be a part of our planning. And conversations need to occur if an individual is going to need long-term supports. A commitment from the waiver case manager for long-term supports needs to be provided prior to job placement services being added to that placement plan. So if you haven't seen it yet, here is the new E1pva and our milestone structure. We worked really hard in our work group to model the E1pva as closely in alignment with the general PBA. And that is how we will term them. We have our general PBA, which that PBA you guys have known and loved for a very long time. And then we now have the E1pva. So the E1 PBA is a PBA with 4 milestones. The E1 PBA is for individuals on one of 4 Medicaid waivers, being the CADI, the Community Access for Disability Inclusion waiver, the brain injury waiver, the Community Alternative Care waiver, or the Developmental Disabilities waiver. And if you provided general PBAs to VR services and it was on your contract, you do not have to make any amendments to provide an E1 PBA. So the E1 PBA adds extra milestone. As you can see, milestone 1 is the same as the general PBA with that signed placement plan at $1,330. Milestone 2 is the same, the first paid day of employment at $1,200. And milestone 3 is the same at successful placement closure of $1,270. What the E1 PBA has is a 4th milestone called the E1 milestone, and it is 120 days of service. And we will talk more about this as we go through the E1 PBA process. So the real significant differences with the general PBA and the E1 PBA is that the E1 PBA payment option comes live online, available July 1st. As I said, the E1 PBA is for job seekers with the Medicaid waivers. The waiver case manager is now part of the team. There is that extra milestone payment, the E1 milestone at 120 days of service. Again, any partner with a PBA on their PT contract can provide either an E1 PBA or a general PBA. If the person is on a waiver and needs the E1 PBA, the E1 PBA is now going to be a new service type, and that in our Workforce One case management system. We know that this could be a job seeker's first experience with competitive integrated employment. It is possible that they may need more individualized and intensive services and job placement assistance and support. So this is why we added that extra milestone. To be clear, we're not saying that the general PBA doesn't have intensive services. We are saying that it's more likely that job seekers using an E1 PBA could need more individualized intensive services and supports throughout the process. Also, as we discussed, the waiver case manager is a member of our placement team. Their involvement will not be as intense as you, the job seeker, or the VR staff, but it will be very important to keep the waiver case manager informed of the job placement and follow-up process and the progress that is being made. Also, remember, there's no flexibility in choice in what PBA you or VRS thinks that job seeker needs. The determining factor for a general PBA or an E1 PBA is one of the Medicaid waivers.
All right, so just like with the general PBA, there's items that the counselor is going to be sending before the signed placement plan meeting to the placement professional. So the first item they'll be sending is that invitation to placement team. They'll be sending the completed sample employment app and then the relevant information from the assessment of VR needs. The new piece the different piece for the E1 PBA would be the invitation to the case manager and the communication that happens with them prior to the signed placement plan meeting. Now, we'll be inviting those waiver case managers, but please note that they won't be required to be there. We don't want to hold up a meeting waiting for them, their schedules. And so we want to make sure that we communicate and get the invitation over, but we're not going to wait for that meeting. Also, there's a little bit of a difference with IPS. With IPS, a lot of the pre-job search activities are completed with the counselor, the provider, and likely a mental health provider as well. They're not completing an invitation to placement team form because they've already likely been working together. The IPS person, placement person, will use their time getting to know that job seeker as the process is really, we know, that rapid engagement. In addition to IPS, if the job seeker is in customized employment and completing a discovery assessment, The placement professional and the counselor should consult to ensure that those pre-job search activities are addressed and documented either in the customized employment plan or in the case notes. Then we find ourselves at the placement plan meeting. During this meeting, of course, we're completing that VRS placement plan or the provider's placement plan. As Sarah mentioned earlier, this form has been updated and is available on our SharePoint and also on our Deed website. The placement professional is responsible for ensuring that everyone's in agreement on this plan. It's a template for identifying the responsibilities of each person in the team, and they're agreed upon, and then signatures are done. And so the placement professional, the counselor, and the job seeker will sign up on the plan. There is a section for the waiver case manager roles and responsibilities on the new placement plan. However, we aren't going to require a signature from them prior to the close of that meeting. As with the general PBA, that 60-day meeting is set up at that meeting, and also everyone is getting a copy of that plan at the close of the meeting. All right, as with this whole process, so important, communicating early, communicating often. At this point, the communication expectations for the placement professional would be at least that weekly communication attempts with that job seeker. If a resume is done, hopefully the resume gets completed, we're sending that off to the counselor, and the monthly progress reports during that job search time, and throughout the whole process for that matter. Also, the VRS expectations, we're working with the case manager. VRS is also checking in with the job seeker to make sure everything's going well with the job search. And all team members assist that job seeker to upload the documents into their Vault account if they want to store them there. All right, so the monthly progress reports for the E1pva, again, they're required. So we're gonna look for those every month until from the time of the placement plan until the time of the placement closure. In that report, there are sections for the employment details and closure details. So those sections you'll see in the report, similar to how the communication update looked. We have requirements from RSA on certain employment details, and all of those requirements are in our monthly progress report. So if you're submitting that to us, we're getting everything we need as far as those requirements go. Everyone's using the same report now, so we're asking all of our partners to use our form, and that helps us with our staff for uniformity and consistency. And we know they should be submitted at the end of each month by the 10th of the following month. And of course, we want to keep that communication going aside from those progress reports at all times. All right, so in an E1 PBA, what does the job search look like? So is it different than a general PBA? And the answer really is that it depends. Like with all VR services, our services are individualized to meet the person's need. So some general considerations to think about is always we want to meet that job seeker where they're at. With the E1 PBA, competitive integrative employment may be new to the job seeker. So they may have worked in some enclaves, some center-based employment, but likely this competitive integrated employment is new. And so because of that, they may need some more frequent meetings or longer meetings. The job search process itself may take longer, and it may require some more job development. And because of all of those pieces, that's the rationale behind that extra milestone of the E1 120 days of service milestone. And we'll be looking at the data in the future to see, how long these processes are taking, and doing some further tweaking and looking at the process to make sure it's running smoothly as we go forward and get that data. All right, so the E1pva 60-day check-in. So just like with the general PBA, we're going to be doing the 60-day check-ins with the E1pva and really looking at assessing that job goal, continually assessing that to make sure it's still appropriate. The supports are there for the person in that job goal. Look at any barriers that might have come up. Encourage and support the job seeker and the placement coordinator keep going. If we think it might take longer, we want to continue to support each other through that process, and brainstorming on ideas. That's always just a huge part of those 60-day meetings with the counselor and the job seeker and the placement professional. At the close of each 60-day meeting, we should be scheduling the next 60-day meeting. We may not need it if the person starts work, but we want to make sure that we have it on the books. And the VRS counselor should be letting the waiver case manager know of those meetings, at least inviting them if they're able to attend, and letting them know about any major decisions or changes that happen as a result of those 60-day meetings. All right, let's talk about the E1 milestone. So this 120 days of service is kind of a new concept for us. This can really happen during a job search or when a person is working. So the milestone is paid at 120 days of service. It's unique to the E1 PBA. It's not a piece of the general PBA. It could be during follow-up services once they've started working. So it can occur at all different points of that process. When we are going to pay for that E1 milestone, we are looking to make sure that we've gotten should have 4 monthly progress reports by that time since that placement plan, a record of the 60-day meetings if they were in job search that long, and an invoice from the provider.
All right. Yay, another job. So the job seeker has accepted the job offer, and just like with the general PBA, there are many things to consider at this point. It is the responsibility of the placement professional to contact the VRS counselor when the job offer has been received to discuss any needed supports. For example, as we talked about job coaching, any accommodations, assistive technology, or uniforms. It's important to address any new discoveries regarding the job seeker's background and barriers to successful employment. Might be childcare, transportation. To consider meeting with the job seeker to assist with the preparation of that first day of work. This can be really helpful for that individual, especially if they're anxious about starting work, to have a meeting and talk about or discuss any questions they may have, or assist in completing any of that pre-employment paperwork for their new job. It could be communicating with the employer as appropriate, and ensuring that that individual understands their responsibility to report their earnings to Social Security or any other government benefit programs that employment may affect. Post-job offer, pre-job start, it is the responsibility of the counselor to identify other needed services for successful employment. And if at the time of the offer, the placement professional, VR counselor, foresee intensive supports will be needed, then job coaching should be discussed, how many hours, and an authorization should be prepared. The VRS counselor will update the waiver case manager and request that long-term support funding is initiated at this time. If job coaching will be needed, the placement professional and VR counselor should also discuss an authorization and whether travel will be needed. Just like the general PBA, the E1 PBA will have those 2 clocks running. And again, they could be the same dates or they could be different. So in review, Employed for 90 days is something that the community partner is tracking. It's that day one of first day of work is day one of employed for 90 days. It tracks the 90 days to reach the PBA milestone 3 and tracks the placement and follow-up service closure. Achieve 90 days of employment stability is the 90-day clock that VRS tracks using Workforce One. Once employment stability is reached, the job seeker is moved to in employment and it starts the achieve 90 days of employment stability. Again, this could be day one of the first day worked, or this could be a later start date. This clock may not be aligned with the employed for 90 days clock, and VR uses it to track outcome closure. So when we talk about first paid day of employment in the E1pva Milestone 2, it is important for the placement professional to contact the VRS counselor as soon as possible with information and the job offer. The placement professional provides the VRS counselor with that information that is needed, and within 7 days completes the monthly progress report with the employment job hire information. The payment for Milestone 2 is when the community partner submits that monthly progress report with the details of job hire and an invoice for the second PBA milestone. To be paid, all monthly progress reports have to have been received by VR since the last milestone was paid.
Okay, so this is a review of what we looked at when we were talking about the general PBA and those changes about follow-up versus job coaching. So again, I know we had a breakout on this, but it's new for us, so we want to make sure we're covering this again. Follow-up just with the E1 PBA as well as the general PBA, as with all job coaching hourly services, it would be the same messaging. Follow-up is provided to all new employees. It helps with new employee orientation, paperwork, adjustment, getting feedback, and looking at other services, whereas job coaching would be more of that intensive training kinds of activities, and could include any of those visuals, checklists, timers, hand over hand kinds of assistance. Another example that might be helpful, I know a lot of our partners, a lot of you will have a job developer as well as a job coach involved with the job seeker. So we just wanted to go through another scenario. So we're going to be talking about Heidi as our job seeker, and Heidi found a new job. So we all celebrate, raise the roof. But Heidi has severe anxiety about starting new things, places, and situations. Based on the relationship and observations working through the placement process, it's determined that Heidi will need some job coaching. Heidi's been working with Sarah in job search and will work with Gretchen as a job coach. So Sarah, the placement professional, will help Heidi with that new paperwork, and that is follow-up. Sarah will continue to check in with Heidi and Gretchen throughout her 90 days of employment, completing those monthly progress reports and updates to the counselor. That's follow-up. Gretchen, the job coach, will go with Heidi on her first day of work. She'll introduce herself in her new role. She'll help Heidi acclimate to the work site, her workspace, and her supervisor. Gretchen will assist with coordinating that communication regarding schedule changes. Gretchen will educate Heidi's supervisor on her preferred learning and communication style. And once Heidi feels comfortable in her job, Gretchen will coordinate with the employer and Heidi a plan for phasing out of her services. Then Gretchen will be updating the VRS counselor weekly and submitting a job coaching report with the invoice. Sarah, the placement professional, then continues her follow-up and submits the monthly progress reports until Heidi's been employed for 90 days and then invoices for milestone 3. All right, so while the participant is working, the VRS counselor should really regularly be checking in with that job seeker. And the check-ins really ensure the counselor maintains that connection with the individual. We don't want at the placement plan or 60-day meeting, the counselor to wave goodbye and say good luck. We want them to be continually involved in that process. And that helps to really ensure that those supports are in place when the person starts their job. So the placement professional will be following up with that job seeker when they're working twice a month, a minimum of twice a month. They'll be submitting those progress reports until closure, providing that support, looking at the individual and what their unique needs are. If there's a job coach, we talked about that, that partner would be submitting an update to VRS best practices weekly with a report and invoice. And then when stability is reached, we talked about the 90-day clocks, but when stability is reached, that starts the achieved in 90 days employment stability clock at that time.
And like the general PBA, the conditions for successful closure from placement and follow-up services are the same with the E1pva. It's going to be important that that position matches the job goal on the employment plan, that the individual is paid at least minimum wage with customary rates of benefits, the number of hours and hours per week is adequate, that it is in a competitive integrated setting, that ongoing supports match the needs of that individual, that they have been employed for 90 days with the same employer and position, unless, as Evie said, that individual made an informed choice for temporary assignments. And then the VRS record of service can stay open even after the job placement and follow-up services have been closed and milestone 3 has been paid. Again, that successful closure for the E1pva milestone is having that final monthly progress report with the details of the accepted job offer and verification of employment. And then our partner will submit an invoice along with that final report. Again, 12 months of an E1pva, this is the same guidance that we just shared. The placement and follow-up services begins day 1 of the signed placement plan, and the placement team meets every 60 days to discuss the job search process for up to 12 months. And again, if job search continues at or beyond that 12-month mark, VRS should consider the same 3 options for the E1pva. If progress in job search is continuing, the team agrees the person is close to a job or employment, the existing PBA is canceled and a new one is encumbered, starting with milestone 1. If placement progress has stalled out or stopped, the person and the team could agree that job search will be discontinued and explore another service that may be necessary to help that individual with their employment goals. And the third one is if a job seeker has received VRS job search services and VRS determines the job seeker can no longer benefit from continued placement services from VR at this time, the team agrees that the placement and follow-up services have been exhausted and the remaining PBA is canceled and the job seeker is referred to another agency, such as the county, for required services. And if appropriate at this time, the VRS case may be closed. Again, it is in all of these cases or all these situations of 12 months of a E1pva or a general PBA, the VRS counselor makes the final decision on PBAs and authorizations. Again, the guidance around holds while in a PBA. When a PBA is paused for more than 2 weeks, a discussion about a hold will take place with that placement team. When placement services are on hold, that communication is going to be really important. Minimally at 30 days, VRS will check in with the job seeker. And at 60 days of a hold, a meeting is held with the placement team and a decision is made about next steps. When placement services are on hold, the PBA clocks are also put on hold. So this will also pause that E1pva clock for 120 days of service and the 12-month mark clock. Again, the next steps at that 60-day meeting will be either scheduling a date to resume job placement services. So this is a commitment to set a date on the calendar to resume services, or the decision to close job placement services. The placement team should stay in communication during a hold. Job placement service closure is at the discretion of the counselor and the job seeker. Again, it's important to note that if an agreement to put a placement file on hold, it stops the clocks, the 12-month mark clock and that 120-day clock. Again, it is essential to communicate with the placement team and assess each individual's needs carefully. And again, we know this is new guidance for you, so when in doubt, the best practice is to consult.
All right, we're coming into the home stretch. We're going to bring it together, that E1pva with some scenarios. This first scenario, you can see at the top, the milestone sequence would be the placement plan, first milestone, the E1 120 days of service milestone, the person starts working, and then closure. So Abdi starts job placement, has his initial placement plan on February 1st. So then we're getting that placement plan and the invoice for milestone 1. Abdi continues in job search. We have that 60-day meeting and everyone's in agreement that will continue. So we're getting those monthly progress reports each month. Abdi continues in job search and has reached 120 days of service on June 1st. So then we're getting, we've gotten those monthly progress reports and we've got the invoice for the E1 milestone. So we're paying that E1 milestone payment there. Then Abdi finds a job and starts his first day on August 16th. The partner submits the monthly progress report with the section on employment details completed and follow-up information and invoices for the Milestone 2. And then Abdi is successful, doing well on his job on November 16th. So we're hitting that 90 days employed and we're getting those monthly progress reports with the closure information and that invoice for the third milestone. Now the next scenario, this person will have a placement plan, begin working, and then they will hit the 120 days of service and then closure. So Dylan starts job placement, has initial placement plan meeting on February 1st. So we're getting that plan and the invoice for the first milestone. He continues in job search and has a 60-day meeting. It's agreed that he'll continue. So we're getting those monthly progress reports. Dylan accepts a job and works his first shift on March 15th. So we're getting that monthly progress report with the information on the job and the invoice for Milestone 2. Then after Dylan's working, he hits that 120 days of service mark on June 1st. We're not having a 60-day meeting because Dylan's working, but he's hitting that E1 milestone marker. So we're getting that monthly progress report. We make sure we have all of those and the invoice for the E1 milestone, and Dylan's doing well on June 15th. And we're looking at the closure with Milestone 3 there. The next scenario is also the person starts working, but this person has a little bump in their road here. So Jane starts job placement, has her initial placement meeting on February 1st. So we've got that first milestone. She continues, has a 60-day meeting and wants to continue with job search. So we're continuing to get those monthly progress reports. She finds a job and starts her first shift on April 5th. So we'll pay that second milestone payment once we get that invoice and the monthly progress report with the details. But Jane quits her job. Does this ever happen to you? It happens to me. So she quits her job on April 15th. Of course, we're all in communication about this. And everyone agrees that wasn't a match. So we're going to resume the job search. And then that she'll have that 60-day meeting after 60 days again in job search. And then we continue on just like we do with the other PBAs. She's meets that in-service 120-day mark on the 15th. So we're paying that E1 milestone. She continues and has another 60-day meeting. Then she finds a job on September 15th. It's a great fit. We're getting those reports. We've already paid milestone 2, so we're not paying that milestone again. But after 90 days, she is happy and doing well. And so at that point, we're getting that closure information in the monthly progress report on that 3rd milestone. The next scenario is for a partial PBA. So this happens sometimes where someone, for some reason, ends their PBA, as we've talked about some of those scenarios earlier, but some starts a job placement or starts his placement plan on February 1st in job seeking. So we're paying that first milestone. We get to the 60-day meeting and everyone's in agreement to continue. He meets the E1 milestone at 120 days. So we're paying for that milestone. And then at the next 60-day meeting, the parties agree that they're going to stop placement services. So we're making sure that we have all the reports that since the placement plan, and at that point we would close the file. Okay, so no retroactive PBAs. All right, so starting July 1st, the E1 PBA will become an option with a rolling implementation for new PBAs. Individuals currently in a general PBA will continue for the remainder of their placement and follow-up. We're not going to change the authorization from general to E1 PBAs. And individuals who are in a general PBA and obtain a waiver while in the PBA will continue in the general PBA for the remainder. Although the E1 process will start on July 1st, the other pieces we talked about, such as holds, job coaching being unbundled, and 12 months in a PBA, those pieces will begin July 1st, but we're not switching anyone between the PBAs after July 1st. So if we have a new person coming after July 1st that's on a waiver, we'll start them in the E1 PBA, but we won't be switching back and forth. All right. So new PBA start July 1st, and here's Sarah and I jumping for joy because we've been waiting for this moment and prepping for this moment. And I think right now we're going to move over to the question phase. So the link is there in the chat for your questions using the Microsoft form. We're going to keep that question link open. So even after this training and after even the first, as you start to encounter questions and work with this E1 process, please continue to submit those questions because we can still receive them. We're really thankful for you all attending today. I know, as Sarah said, PBAs are super exciting for Sarah and I, but they might not be for everyone, especially 2 or 3 hours of training. So thank you for hanging with us. And we'll start to categorize some of your questions now and go through them. Thank you.
Yes, thank you so much, Evie and Sarah. That was fantastic. All right, thanks everyone. This is Kim Babine. Thanks for sticking with us. We are excited to answer some of your questions here. So I'm just going to, I need to do one other thing, but basically we have Chris McVeigh and Amanda Jensen-Stahl who are joining us to answer questions. And so I am going to kick things off with a question to Evie and Sarah. We have a couple of questions around job coaching. So can you talk a little bit about, is there a limit to the number of hours of job coaching VRS can authorize? How does that work?
We are not saying there's a limit to the number of hours VRS can authorize because the services are individualized. However, at 60 hours of job coaching, then it's going to require a RAM consult.
Great, thanks, Sarah. This is Kim again. We'll follow up on that with a couple other job coaching questions. So do vendors need to amend their contracts to add job coaching separate from the PBA?
So this is Sarah again. If you are a community partner and you have a PT contract with us and job coaching is not a line in your PT contract, we would highly recommend that you reach out to us and amend your contract to have job coaching and an hourly fee put on your contract.
This is Kim. And so reach out to Sarah or Ann Paulson. We also have Jess Othwaite and Janine Oyen who've joined the community partnerships team. Or if Kim Babine's email is the easiest one for you to find, you can reach out to me too, and I'll hook you up with Ann and Sarah and Jess and Janine. Talk a little bit about what communication should be happening between providers and VR about the need for job coaching. The question specifically was, should providers call VR to see if job coaching can begin? Can you speak a little to that?
Sure. I think at the time of the placement plan meeting, that's really a great time for the counselor to share with the placement professional what their thoughts are and the job seeker to express what their thoughts are about job coaching based on their job goal. And then, like I said, I really see it evolving and continuing. So as you're locating that employer and talking with the employer and learning more about the job duties, it's going to continue to refine what you know about that job seeker's skills and how they match up with those job requirements. So it will continue to be a process, and communication will happen, I know, at multiple points along that way. And I see Chris's hand up too.
Hi, everybody. Chris McVeigh. I just want to reiterate what Evie just mentioned. It's so important that at a very early stage, starting at that placement plan meeting, that there be discussion about the potential need for job coaching services. I know that one of the things as we were consulting with various people within vocational rehabilitation services, but also with our community partner committee, which is comprised of community partners from around the state. The topic around communication came up, and it's so important to communicate. There are times where a counselor will not have a sense of whether the person needs job coaching or think, I don't think they're going to need job coaching. And at times that comes up as a job search is going on or even after the job starts. And that's, again, the need for communication, that if the placement professional or job coach is seeing that there is a need for more hours, that needs to be communicated very frequently, and not in a monthly progress report only, but pick up the phone, email, text, find ways to engage and to connect with that counselor in the event that job coaching hours are needed or more hours are needed. So just wanted to put that plug in that you can't over communicate when it comes to a person who's in the job search or after they start the job.
Thanks, Chris. And you mentioned a little bit in the questions here, but also the question was, is a separate authorization needed for job coaching? And so if someone can speak to that.
Yes, so a separate authorization will be needed for job coaching. So if the agreement is that that individual is in follow-up services and we're going to add job coaching services as well, then an authorization is going to need to be put in place for job coaching services. And part of that authorization for job coaching services could also include that travel or transportation to vendor part of the authorization. So that is where at that time of job offer, it's going to be really important to communicate with the VR counselor the job coaching hours that you're going to be requesting and needing. And again, sort of to Chris and Evie's point, is at that time of job offer, the thought or the concept of job coaching shouldn't be new, right? We're working and we're planning and we're a team and we're going through the process together. And as you're picking up on your job placement services and the context clues that you have in working with that individual and learning that individual's support needs, their learning styles, that's when those conversations should be happening. And so everyone on the team should be pretty prepared that job coaching is going to be needed as a layered service. But at the time of job offer is when that request would actually happen. And then the authorization could be put in place for their start date.
This is Kim. There are some questions around, it's just some concerns about how do we make sure that that gets in on time, that we don't have purchasing violations. Do you have some ideas for best practices to make sure that everything flows smoothly with that need for separate authorization?
Yeah, I can speak to that. I know as a placement person, this has come up a lot with like uniforms or those last minute things people need to start work. And we have to get those authorizations in place really quickly. So I would say, let the counselor know right away. I think there's others. I know that there's other staff at VRS that can help if like the counselor's on vacation, reach out to the techs in those offices to get some support with that as well. And just, the worst case scenario would be somebody gets a job to start, they get the job offer on Saturday to start Sunday, for example. And, if we can't get the job coach in place, really the person, they're going to need that support to start the job. We might have to talk with the employer about a little bit later start date, because if it's necessary, it's necessary. And so it should be discussed along the way. We know, last minute things can come up. But making sure that they have all the pieces in place to support them on that first day is really crucial.
Thank you. And with that, this is Kim, with that job coaching authorization, if someone is working, has worked with the individual, if a provider has worked with the individual through the PBA process, would there be a separate intake authorized for those job coaching services, those layered services?
This is Chris McVeigh, and I would say that that's not something that we would support, given the fact that the performance-based agreement is in place, and the intake work for that provider is in place. The job coaching would follow, but should not require a separate intake.
This is Kim. Just to expand on that, it is these layered services, whether it's job coaching, we also will in the future provide more information around how job tryout or other pieces like that might be layered with the PBA. And when you as a provider are already working with the individual in the PBA and we authorize for an hourly service layered with that, we assume that you already know the individual, that you've already done the intake. We know that the services are a little different, but those can be, as you're working on those goals and working on that, on those new services with the individual, those initial conversations are built into the hourly hours that you're authorized for. So it's only when a provider would be working with someone new for job coaching or new for this, that then we would consider authorizing for an intake. All right, we'll go to a few questions on the milestones. So is it still required to have the first 60-day meeting scheduled before the payment of the first milestone for both the general and the E1pva?
So I think if I'm understanding this right, at the placement plan meeting, we're going to schedule the 60-day meeting. And so that's always recurring and being scheduled. So at the next 60-day meeting, we're going to schedule the following 60-day meeting and so forth. So we're always scheduling those, and we would do that before we conclude that placement plan meeting. And then at the conclusion of that meeting, the partner could submit that milestone 1 and the placement plan for payment.
Thanks, Abby. This is Kim. The question about the 2 90-day clocks. Provider says that we've had a few instances where counselors let our placement staff know that the milestone 2, how it's been confusing how it's achieved or met with stability versus the 90-day specific to the 90-day clock. So can you spend a little bit more time on the difference between the two 90-day clocks?
This is Chris McVeigh. I think I'll take this one. So here's a real opportunity that I think has been living in the gray around performance-based agreements. And when we pay our milestone payments, especially for milestone 3, we know that since we started a PBA many years ago, that this has been a question. When do we pay that milestone 3? And so it's actually for the years that I've worked for VRS and we've had a PBA, I myself have been at times confused about, well, when should we pay that? What we're doing with this new training that's launching July 1st for general and E1pva is separating out the two 90 days. There's 2 sets of 90 days. And I think for our VRS staff, we have not been clear ourselves, and you've not received the clear direction, and I'll take ownership of that, around when we pay that third milestone. So what we're doing is making it very clean, as Evie and Sarah trained to. It's very clean. 90 days after the person starts their job, so from day 1 of work to day 90 of work, is when that third milestone can be paid. There's a separate 90 days that VRS and SSB staff have to be aware of and identify. And for us, the 90-day clock starts the day the person is considered stabilized, after job coaching has concluded, or in the case of someone who's on a waiver or not on a waiver, if they have long-term supports, and the counselor determines that person is working at their capacity, and that can be the start of that 90 days, and then that 90-day clock starts at that time. So in the waiver world, and as we're training on E1, it's about the level of support someone needs and their ability to satisfactorily complete the job or do the job with or without supports. So it doesn't mean that the person no longer needs job coaching. In the cases of somebody who's on a waiver or may have access to extended employment grant funds, those are examples that might be the level of support that they need. And that's okay, because that long-term support is there. So we're separating out the 290 days. For our community partners, that 90 days to you means 90 days after the start of job, you can bill for that milestone 3. VRS staff and SSB staff, you can pay that third milestone once that invoice is submitted, because the 90 days of work has been completed. On our side, again, there's a distinction about when someone is considered stabilized or meets that threshold of they have the supports they need and they do that job. That's when we can go ahead and consider our 90 days to be satisfied. I don't know if anybody else wants to add in there.
Thanks, Chris. This is Kim. Question on the paperwork. So regarding payment for milestone 3, do we need to resubmit all the monthly progress reports occurring since milestone 2 payment, or just ensure that they have been sent to the counselor at the appropriate times throughout that period?
You said milestone 3, Kim?
Yep.
Okay, yep. So for milestone 3, you be sure to complete that closure piece, the closure employment details, and submit that along with the invoice. And we do not need to resubmit all the months of the monthly progress reports. Just submit those timely each month by the 10th of the following month. And we'll be looking to make sure we have those before we pay those invoices.
Question from Kim. I'm going back to the very beginning. I've been trying to hold it because I'm taking notes, but could you review again that in the initial meeting and the plan development with the team, I think you mentioned something about no signatures needed on that particular session, or do we just take attendance and put it on the form, or? Because we're not submitting a report, you said, right? And there's no attendance and no signature needed, no plan signature needed. Is that correct?
Right, so
you-
when I talked about the placement plan, if you're using our VRS placement plan, there's a
Mhm.
space for signatures for all the team members
Mhm.
except the waiver case manager. So we don't expect a signature from the waiver case manager because we don't want to hold up that process waiting to make sure that they're at that meeting.
Mhm.
So those 3 core team members will need to sign that placement plan and submit that along with an invoice for that first milestone. After that, we'll be looking for those monthly progress reports, but not with the placement plan since they haven't had any progress yet. So
So my placement plan for the E1MN should be the same as the PBA, where I would send it to the VR counselor for signature and the client, same as before. And then, but am I submitting that with the intake billing? It says no
Yes.
report, still
So
doing the
there's-
same thing.
right, you're doing the same thing.
Oh, okay.
And those signatures should be collected at the meeting. So, and if we're doing a virtual meeting, of course, we're sending it, but in our hopefully someday world where we're all meeting together in person, we'll be collecting all those at the same time, those signatures, and going through those pieces and then submitting that for payment with the invoice.
Great, thanks, Evie. And any follow-up questions and any additional questions, please use the form that's linked in the chat. So that will help us manage this time that we have. I'm actually going to share my screen and show you, there's some questions about where do we find these forms and where do we find additional information. So I'm going to share my screen here and show you some things that we've done on our external website. So this link is one that I send out quite often. It is, and I can put it in, maybe someone else can throw it in the chat. It's our community partners part of our deed website. And it looks a little different. We have 5 new sections. So there's a couple that you'll go to a lot. First is this community partner guide for the VR program. The second one is to the right and it's VRS news. So just so we'll go into the news really quickly here. The news has a tab that says forums on it. And that's where we have information from today. Here's the presentation materials linked for both PDF and PowerPoint. And it also has past forums and ability to register for the forums coming up in the future. Then there also is a tab that has the messages that we've sent out via email archived here. So you can always go back and see what we've said. And if you'd like to sign up for future email updates, if you registered today, you'll be added to that email list. If you or other colleagues would like to be added, you can contact Carla Eckhoff. So I'm going to go back to that main community partners page and go into our community partner guide. This is really where a lot of the bulk of the information is. And under contracted services, there's one more click because we're building out this information about billing, authorizations, invoices, and reports. There's more information that we need to kind of clarify there, but we're building that out. So if you click services here, then you'll see little drop downs for all of the services that we have on our PT contracts. So if you go to job placement and retention services, there's a link that'll bring you to its own performance-based agreement for job placement and retention page. And that's where you'll see information. And again, a lot of the information that we're presenting today is we haven't translated it all to the website. So this will get built out in the next couple of weeks. But the information will be here. The forms, there's one change under here. The overview has a typo that we're correcting and we'll get up shortly. But this is where the forms are. So this is where you can find that monthly progress report and other, the coaching report, samples. There's the placement plan, other pieces like that. So forms under the PBA part of the community partner guide. So I'm going to stop sharing and get back to a couple questions. So that's where you can find everything. Now we'll go to another question on the milestones. For the new milestone for E1MN, or for the E1pva, the E1 milestone, if a person is placed before the 120 days of service, would a community partner be allowed to bill for that new milestone, or is it only for follow-up prior to placement or services prior to placement?
So we built the 120-day milestone, that E1 milestone, as a flexible milestone. And so that's why we tried to walk through the two different scenarios. What that milestone is really triggered by is 120 days of service since the placement plan meeting. So a person could be in job search for those full 4 months and then, be at 120 days of service, still in job search. You would submit monthly progress report and an invoice for that E1pva, or the person could have been in that first 120 days, they could have been in job search and secured employment. And so they're in follow-up services and they hit 120 days of service. So it's 120 days of service regardless of their status of job search or employed.
Thanks, Sarah. This is Kim. For an individual on a waiver who's approaching 1 year in a VRS PBA, can you talk about what happens at that 12-month mark around, so after someone's been in a PBA for about a year? Do we start a new one? Do we end placement? Does it go back to county funded services? What are some of those considerations?
So I'll encourage you to kind of look at this PowerPoint, the slide that talked about the 12-month mark. There's those 3 situations we went over. But in general, the first scenario would be if someone is making progress, they're still continuing, and everyone agrees they just need some more time, and they'll be getting that job soon. So that's happening. We should close the PBA and authorize a new PBA. A year of being in a PBA, we think is, that's a long time for our providers to go without additional funding. So we want those PBAs to be closed out, reauthorized, start with the first placement plan meeting and continue on from there, just as you would. The second scenario would be if the person is really stalled out on their job search or stopped job searching, and they really need to stop the PBA and look at other services within VR, such as like job shadowing or some of the other services that we can kind of put in. Maybe we need to relook at that job goal and change it. So kind of the back to the drawing board kind of scenario. And the third scenario would be, we've gone through a whole year, there's no longer progress. We've exhausted all of our services. And at that time, we close the PBA, and likely if they're in an E1 PBA, we'd be consulting with the county on what waiver services are available for that person from there.
Thanks, Evie. This is Kim. If someone is already on a general PBA, but they are on a waiver, so they meet the requirements for the E1 PBA, should VRS staff be switching those authorizations to an E1 PBA after July 1st?
This is Sarah. What we have decided is there aren't going to be switches between general PBA and E1 PBAs starting on July 1st. So the E1 PBA is a new payment option starting for people who enter job placement services after July 1st and have one of those waivers. So if an individual is on a waiver and in a general PBA, they would continue in their current PBA through the completion of that PBA or that 12-month cycle that we just talked about.
Thanks, Sarah. This is Kim. In the nitty-gritty of this, I appreciate the questions. They really are helping straighten some of this out, and so please keep them coming. They're great. This question is from a provider about when there is a job hire at the beginning, middle of the month, do we immediately submit the monthly report, then submit one for the remainder of the month? Do we just wait till the end of the month for the report and invoice together? How does that work?
This is Sarah. So our recommended best practice is like if a person got a job on the 15th of the month, we would ask minimally that it's that monthly progress report with the job hire detail comes in within 7 days of the job offer. Now, so it is possible that you might, let's say, submit your monthly progress report with the job hire information, let's say on July 20th. We would want you to get back on cycle and submit a progress report at the summarizing each month. So then you, in that month, if there's a job hire, you probably would submit 2 monthly progress reports. One at that time of the offer, so we have that information, and then back in cycle, summarizing the entire month and those first few weeks of work and the follow-up and how that's going. So during a hire month, there would probably be 2 reports. Now, if a person, got a job on July 28th, then that would, sink into the cycle of the end of the month. So, use your discretion on that. But if it happens, if there's a possibility, we would want that because we will always want that job hire information as soon as you can get that to us and have that information, because that is so vital and important, of course. And then we want to stay on that monthly progress report schedule of summarizing an entire month and having it submitted by the 10th of the following month.
And I think too, we talk about those monthly progress reports are a flash in time, and communication is just so important along the way as we keep talking about that communication. But a quick call to the counselor that got a job, they're starting this day here, and just a quick touch in is just always the best, I think, best practice. And so I think letting them know as soon as possible. And at that point, the counselor is going to be working with the waiver case manager too, to get those pieces in place for those long-term supports. So many pieces kind of hinge on that job offer and that communication that we need those pieces, but we need that communication first.
Thanks, Evie. There are a fair number of questions. This is Kim. There are a fair number of questions about the distinction between follow-up and job coaching. And we know that we provided as many examples and specifics as we could get to for today, but we know we'll learn a lot as this gets going. And so we will continue hearing from you. Please continue sharing with us where maybe it's a little fuzzy and we need to provide more clarification. So I just wanted folks to know that we'll work together to distinguish between those as we move forward. So the question specifically is again to this communication throughout the process. So at what point should the community partner request job coaching hours when they're already providing on-site supportive services like the follow-up services? So at what point should the provider be in touch about possible need for job coaching hours?
This is Sarah. What I would say is at that time of job offer is the ideal time to have that conversation about putting an authorization in place for job coaching hours. However, we do know, it's a little hard because every scenario is different and we know we work with people, and when you work with people, everyone has a different scenario, right? But if you're working with an individual and they get a job offer and they start working and you're doing follow-up services, an expectation of the PBA, and you come across a hurdle, all of a sudden something changes and you're like, whoa, I didn't see this coming. You know what, I'm going to need to get in there and do some more intensive services. As soon as you know that, then just alert the counselor that this is a need. It would be similar to finding out, like Evie was saying, sometimes like putting an accommodation in place or getting a new uniform in place or something that they might need. Sometimes we just have to work as quickly as possible to put the services in place. So as soon as you have an awareness that that is going to be needed, that would be where you would make that request. Again, hopefully through the process, you have those context clues that job coaching supports will probably be needed. And if there's agreement, it makes sense at that time of job offer to put that job coaching authorization in place. You could put in 10 hours and doesn't mean you're going to be there at day one at their orientation. but that job coaching support could be available, knowing that that might come up too.
This is Chris McVeigh. I was just going to add this in, is that I can tell you in all honesty that we have really focused on identifying the distinctions and the differences between job coaching and follow-up services. But as Sarah said, it really is on an individual basis. So putting something in our policy, I mean, it's guidance. And it really is the counselor and that placement professional and the person talking together, and that person's, if it's a guardian, if it's a family member, who can also provide some context, sometimes a case manager. And really where we want to have the conversations first is well in advance of that person starting a job, that when it can take place, that conversation about the job coaching needs would be at the time of the placement plan. I think the distinction that we would say around the job coaching versus follow-up supports really is about the intensity of the need that that person has. So as I think about someone who's on a DD waiver, for example, or brain injury waiver, having them start a job and the typical things that anybody needs to do in order to start the job, and the extra assistance required due to disability is really the factor to consider as to whether it's job coaching or follow-up supports. If the person literally cannot fill out paperwork on their own, or if the person is having a hard time bringing in that information they're hearing in the orientation, and you as the job coach or placement professional need to repeat that multiple times for them to get it. Those are examples of job coaching. And it goes beyond the employment supports that typically would be provided as part of a PBA. I hope that helps a little bit.
Thanks, Chris. This is Kim. Amanda, I was wondering if you could speak a little bit about what's happening with E1MN and the resources that you are working on with our DHS partners for resources and trainings that are coming up in the coming months.
Sure, this is Amanda. So E1MN officially launches July 1st. And so I know that there were some questions that came in around waiver services and those types of things. And so I'll just note that DHS will be updating their HCBS, their guidance around those services. And so you can look for that July 1st. I know I have talked about this a lot, but I would always direct you to the E1MN website. I'll put it in the chat. There is a plethora of information there. Anything from those core trainings, if you didn't get a chance to participate in those, we have those broken into 5 short videos. So things like engage, plan, find, keep. What is that? How does that work? Making sure that you get a chance to look at that. We've been building out our frequently asked questions. There's a lot of questions in there. So take a look, because after the coffee chats, we've been uploading the questions to that FAQ site. And then we're continuing those monthly coffee chats moving forward, July, August, and September. And then we're also continuing to work on training. So stay tuned for that. And I would just say, if you have questions that are really specific to the waiver, case managers, 245D licensing, that coffee chat form is really going to be the best place to submit those questions. And I'll say it again, I know I've said it before, it's really our chance, and by our, I'm talking about VRS and SSB, working with DHS and working together to provide uniform responses. And so, you know, we can talk about the PBAs and the E1pvas because that's very specific to our service, and making sure that you all understand as providers as well as staff. Now, case managers, you know, they don't necessarily need that level of training. They don't need to know the nitty-gritty details of our PBA or E1pvas, but really their role around, you know, providing long-term supports and being involved in training. And so that's the training, that's the messaging that's going out to case managers. So any of those specific questions that fall into more of the waiver 245D case management bucket, send those to the coffee chat and we can be addressing those as they come in. Our next one's at the end of July, so mark your calendar. Or if it's very specific, then we just address it kind of one-on-one.
Thanks, Amanda. We are coming to the end of our time, and so I'm going to share a little bit of information about how to communicate with us in the coming weeks and moving forward. But then also Amanda, Chris, Sarah, and Evie, if there are any, we didn't get to all the questions, we will be incorporating the questions that come in into additional training. We ourselves with VRS, we're going to develop, we have been developing an FAQ that we'll publish and send out tomorrow. It'll actually be on that PBA page that I linked to and that I showed, and Sarah showed you how to navigate to in the chat. So we'll have FAQs that come up that will address some of the questions that came in that we don't have time for. But if there's any other points that you want to make, Amanda, Chris, Evie, and Sarah will go to you in just a second. But I just wanted to share with everyone, both community partners and staff, so VRS staff and SSB staff, community partners, the question form that you've been using today that we've linked to and we can link to again is going to stay open at least through July. So that is the best way to communicate with this group here to say, this is how it's working. This is what's working well. Here's where I experienced a hiccup. This is a question I have. So, you can always contact any of us directly, but it'll be best if we can divide some of those questions and be able to answer them as quickly as possible if you submit them into the form. And then we'll be updating. The plan is to update the FAQ about weekly, and we will at the end of the week. So we're going to work on questions through the week and then update on Friday. And I'll send out emails via that email list that we talked about when there are new FAQs that are put up. But you can always just check the website too to see if there's anything new there, but we'll communicate those about weekly. So
this is Sarah. I'm just going to add, if you have been using our question form, which I think a lot of you have because we've gotten so many good questions, there is a last question, number 5, where you can put your contact information. So we're happy to follow up with you directly. Your contact information comes privately through that form. It's not public. So, if you're submitting those questions and you have a specific scenario or something that you want to ask and you want us to get back to you specifically to you, make sure you put your contact information. Otherwise, we will just collect all the questions and we will work on keeping our FAQ up to date. So I just wanted to draw your attention to the ability to ask a specific question and get an answer directly back if you put your contact info.
Great. So Amanda, Evie, Sarah in particular, or Chris, any questions that you saw come through that we can answer in the last couple minutes here you want to hit? No? Okay, so closing comments. Anything else? Evie, Sarah, Amanda, Chris?
I would just say thank you for coming today. We know that we shared a lot of information with you today, and use that form, ask us questions. Really, we appreciate the partnership that we have. I know both Evie and I, and Amanda too, have sat on both sides of the table as far as job placement services. And so we really do understand and value that partnership that we have with you, and that, supporting an individual through this process is a team approach. And so communication is just really the key. As we go through some of these changes, we hope that we provided some new guidance that will help the process along. But we also know when we present anything new, that it takes a while to absorb that, or sometimes it takes the actual situation to be able to address it. So just stay in really good communication with the placement team. And when you're in doubt, just consult. We want to keep that partnership open. We want to support the individuals to be successful. We know that the changes to the general PBA come online July 1st, and we know that the payment option for the E1pva also comes online July 1st. And so we've tried to make them work as closely in tandem as possible, but there are some significant differences. But just reach out and ask questions. We're all in this together.
Very well said, Sarah. Thank you so much. I know we're ending a couple minutes ahead of schedule. Absolutely, we value the partnership, VRS, SSB, and our community partners. We can't do this work without you. And I just hope that this information gives you what you need. But yes, as Sarah said, you may need to revisit this video. We want to encourage you to reach out to the resources that Kim and her team are putting up on our community partners page. And again, my thanks to everyone for joining us and paying attention for 3 hours. That's a big feat. So again, my thanks.
And I just want to say thank you too. And also watch that community partner site, because Sarah and I and some others are developing some more in-depth training on the process. So you'll see some webinars coming out on the E1 and general PBA process on that website. So stay tuned for that.
All right, this is Kim. We will sign off. Again, I echo what my colleagues have said. We value this partnership. We're so grateful for you. This is going to be great for the individuals that we serve and providing services to them where they need it. So we are committed to working together and making this work. So we can do that by just ongoing communication, and we hope to hear from you, good, bad, or otherwise. So thank you very much. Have a great day, and we'll see you soon.
Thank you.